You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we're back with another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
And we are excited to bring you episode 16.
Woohoo! We finally got clear on what episode number we're at.
We cheated and looked beforehand. But
we are upping our professionalism.
Yeah, we're super upping our professionalism for today. And it's a good thing because today's topic is comparisons and how difficult it can be when we spend our lives either comparing ourselves to other people, comparing our kids to other people's kids, how it feels to be compared against other people, and so forth.
Comparing our day-to-day life with what other people's day-to-day life looks like.
We'll get into all of it, and we'll hopefully offer some helpful info at the end as to things that we're trying in our lives to try to get out of the comparison game, because it really is a losing game.
It's not a fun game.
This is the thing. You know, I can even remember as a kid being told there will always be someone better than you. And well, that's not, but I don't take it as an I take it as a reality.
Sure.
And if you are constantly worried that you're not the very best at something, or that you aren't, that you're not stacking up against all the people in your peer group when you're a kid, that's just, it's a dead end, you know, because even the kid, I'll tell you, like, having been the best at a few things in a group of friends or whatever.
You don't say.
If I don't say myself, thank you very much. But I'm serious. Like, I feel like there have been times in my life where I have achieved excellence at things.
Sure.
I know that when I've defined myself by comparisons and saying like, okay, well, sure, I'm good at this thing, but man, I really wish I was better at that thing.
Right. There's like a never an end, right? You're just, you can never fully feel like you've gotten there.
Unless you're like actually holding an Olympic gold medal and you say like, look at me, I'm the best loser in the world. Because I've been near the top of, say, like when I played poker, and there were still people that were making more money and doing whatever else. And so and I did have difficulties at the time being at peace with what I was accomplishing versus comparing that to other people. And I think a lot of people, know this sort of intrinsically, but they might not know how many ways it can manifest in parenting specifically. So
yeah, I think that's true. I think we're comparing ourselves or making comparisons, at least I'll speak for myself, more often than I even realize I'm doing it. You almost get to a point in our culture, I think, where we're kind of defining ourselves as we compare to others. And so we want to talk a little more about that today.
Yeah, for sure. And shout out to the Facebook group that we're in as well, because this conversation was sparked by someone asking very thoughtfully in there about the pain points about unschooling. This person was just trying to throw out, because obviously people that talk about unschooling oftentimes focus on the good parts, because I think those of us who do it, I think it's very natural. Like, we're hoping to, we really enjoy the lifestyle that we've kind of created for ourselves. And I would be happy to persuade people to consider it for sure.
Yeah, to make it feel more accessible or worth a shot to people.
Exactly. And when you're making a case for a certain lifestyle to people, you tend not to just offer up all the worst parts about it, because there's going to be worst parts about everything. And we landed on one of the tricky parts about unschooling being the fact that when you're leading a very unconventional lifestyle, it's going to be very natural for these comparisons to arise in your mind and in the minds of people that are sort of, whether you like it or not, evaluating how things are going for your family, right? And so then we realized, hey, the comparison game is not useful only for parents or of unschooling kids, but just parents in general and people in general.
Yeah. So we're going to talk specifically about how comparison relates to parenting. And really, even if you are not on the unschooling path, if you are just trying to parent more gently or any of these things, or even if you're not doing that, like James said, if you're a parent, you're probably falling into this trap somewhere. Yeah.
So where does this comparison thing come from? Because on one hand, it seems as though the only thing that should matter would be how things are going for us, right? Like, in reality, if I look across the street and my neighbor's driving a Benz, it doesn't actually affect me at all, right?
It doesn't need to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it doesn't change my life if he changes up cars. But I think that it's so deeply ingrained in us, this constant comparison that happens. And I think it's worth trying to examine where this comes from. And I think it's worthwhile for two reasons. So the first thing I think of when it comes to comparisons, I think the two areas that people are exposed to this most as they're growing up are if they have siblings in their own home. Comparisons between siblings are very, very common among parents, whether they hope to share those feelings with their kids or not. Parents are wondering, like, well, why is this kid not reading at the same age as that kid? Or, hey, this kid was really into making friends and this one's shy. Did we do something wrong? You know? And I'll tell you, as a kid that grows up with brothers, it's very difficult to not notice that those comparisons exist, whether they come from your parents or from other sources. Like I can recall also my brother Chris had the same teacher as I did. I think it was for 5th grade. And I remember he came back and was like, he wasn't really sad, but he was like, yeah, the first thing she said was, oh, you're James's brother, right? And all of the layers that can be built on top of that. So having siblings or even just cousins or kids around your own age is a huge source for it. And then the other biggest one, and this is one that just reinforces the idea of comparison nonstop for 12 years. And by now you've probably guessed that it's school. The way our schools are structured are explicitly designed for comparison. They're
built on that, really.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the grading system, I mean, some teachers grade on a curve. How are you doing compared to your peers to reinforce that? Just the whole model of having kids all of the same age be in classrooms with one another. There have been extensive bodies of research that have demonstrated that kids in mixed age environments tend not to engage in this comparison game, this very toxic comparison game from my perspective. But the kids in same age environments are comparing themselves to one another constantly.
And they're constantly being compared to each other by their authority figures.
Well, yeah, it's a flywheel. It perpetuates itself where they are sitting there in class. They're looking around. They can see who's getting the A's and who's not. They can see who's trying out for the sports teams and making it and who isn't. And the teachers are, I mean, I can recall sitting in a classroom where a teacher was openly comparing the academic merits of the kids in there. And so what happens when you're being compared in some areas, it's very natural for kids to seek where they are the best, right?
Right. So, this is the paradigm that they're growing up in. And so they're going to start to do that as well.
And I think it manifests in all sorts of wild ways that many people wouldn't have even guessed. I mean, I certainly think that physical bullying is a classic example here. Someone feels like they're not up to snuff in the ways that are more acceptable, so they attempt to assert themselves and thereby compare themselves favorably to these kids who are maybe getting good grades or maybe being looked upon highly by parents or teachers. This can be from sibling to sibling or from just other students in the classroom. 100%. I think it can manifest in terms of like this class clown behavior, right? Like, oh, those kids are the smart kids. They get the attention for that. How can I get positive attention?
Right. I'm going to be funny.
Exactly. Or those kids are the good-looking kids or whatever it is. And yeah, I think that nonstop focus on comparing ourselves to others can lead to all sorts of things that many people just wouldn't even guess. And this is to say nothing of the fact that schools also offer open comparison contests, like voting on superlatives.
Oh, yeah.
Best looking,
I remember that from middle school and high school.
Most likely to succeed, right? And so by the time we emerge from these environments, whether it's our home environments or school environments, and we become adults, we've been spending so much time comparing ourselves to others that it's very natural for that to continue into adulthood, right?
Yeah, it becomes our way of being.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess the question becomes, to what degree is comparison useful in our lives? And to what degree should we avoid engaging in it? And how should we do so if we determine that? Because I will say in some areas in our lives, comparison can be helpful, right? Like say you are running a business and if you just sit around going, I'm not going to compare my business to my competitors. Right. This business is good enough as it is. Like maybe it is. Maybe you're making enough money and you're happy with that. But it might be useful to look and say, those people are winning market share. Why are they doing that?
Right.
So this isn't to throw comparison out altogether or to pretend as though we're perfect, precious little snowflakes that nothing can possibly be better than. But it is to try to bring it in and say, okay, there are times where comparison is useful. I would say those are pretty narrow. And there are a whole host of other times where probably we should work to disregard it.
Yeah, I think in my experience, when I catch myself falling into that kind of comparison rut, as I've become more aware of it, I should say, I think I wasn't aware of it for a long time, but as I've become more aware of it, I've realized that every time I start going there, I can't find joy. I'm just upset and grumpy and unsure and doubting, and I just lose all ability to stay present. It has so many negative effects for me.
Yeah, well, and I think another thing that's kind of worth considering here is we have this very, again, toxic dynamic in our culture where we're all at once comparing ourselves constantly, but we also have this huge societal value of modesty as well. So like if we say, like if someone walked around and said, well, geez, I'm not the best academic, but I'm so funny. Do you want to know how funny I am? Mm-hmm. So they're comparing themselves. But if you own the things you're really good at, people just think you're kind of a jerk. You know? Like they're just saying, like you did earlier, you told me, oh, are there things you're excellent at? You were just joking, obviously. But like there is that attitude. Like if you walk around and say, hey, did you you know, I'm the best in my office, this and that and the other thing.
Right.
People just think that you're conceited or whatever. And there's this fine line between confidence and being vain and all those other things. And so, yeah, I think we land in almost the worst possible spot when it comes to our society here, because we're constantly compared against others, but encouraged to not own our victories in the same way. So anyway, I think that's kind of weird. So anyway, I think a quick and easy way to know if comparison is valuable or helpful in your life is to think about times in your life where you've been openly compared to others and think about how that's felt. So it can be on either end. It can be someone saying, oh, why can't you be more like your sister?
Right.
So I'm going to guess that probably didn't feel good if something like that was said to you. Or it can be on the other side. I can harken back to being in this one particular history class where this teacher had a particularly nasty way of playing favorites. And I happened to be one of the favorites in the class. And at the time, I don't think I totally reflected on just how terrible this was, frankly, but she would announce people's grades that they would get on her essays. This is an AP history class. So these weren't dumb people, but she would say, I'll make up a name, Brandon. Wow, Brandon, 60 on the essay. That's the worst in the class. She would say that openly. Oh, and well, here's someone who actually focused on the essay at hand. James, nice job, 95, right? And so on one hand, you should think, well, geez, I'm succeeding. I should feel good. But you just feel terrible when you're the person.
It's such an awful feeling.
Especially if you're an empathetic person and, you know, you're there right next to the person. I know another good friend of mine, he was basically compared very favorably to his little brother throughout their childhood. And I obviously won't name names or anything like that, but even though he was kind of the golden boy in his family, he could see the pain and upset on his little brother's face all the time and just sit there. And I think it had really long-lasting consequences for not only how he views himself, how when he has a very difficult time owning his own successes, acting in confident ways, because that, like being praised and being compared to others, felt so terrible to him. He loved his little brother so much.
There might be a huge piece of just guilt there for being successful.
And from his perspective, he happens to be a really thoughtful guy, but he could see the upset on his brother's face. And maybe his parents did too. And the parents were thinking, oh, well, this is worth
it to motivate this younger kid.
This will motivate little Davey here to go and get it done and get better grades and, you know, be more attentive and so forth. But all it really did was, I have no idea. I wasn't very good friends with Davey, but I know that for the older guy, it took him a long time. And I think he's probably still processing it to this day. So all of this to say, when you lead your life in such a way that you know that you're being compared to others constantly, it simply doesn't feel good.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to result in a healthy outcome.
Exactly.
And just a quick reminder here before we continue that I want to make it clear that this comparison thing is something that so many people do, and it is really natural. And especially within the culture that we live. So if you're listening to this and hearing yourself in a lot of this is the purpose of this is to not make you feel badly about the comparing that you're doing. It's really to help us all bring it to light and notice if we are kind of falling into this trap, and then talk a little bit about how we can work towards something that feels better.
Yeah, sure. I think it's actually an invisible pain point for people that they're not even putting their
that's
finger
what I
on.
was saying before. Like, I think I was experiencing so much pain because I was comparing myself and our family to what I was seeing other families doing, but I didn't even realize that's where the pain was coming from for a long time.
Yeah, so like you might come downstairs and say something like, oh, I feel like our kids should be doing more art projects. Like, are they getting enough exposure to the arts? So in your mind, the thing that actually, surfaces is like, our kids aren't doing enough art.
We're not
That's
enough.
the problem.
Right.
The problem is that we aren't providing them with a wide enough array of opportunities or something like that. When in reality, what was going on in your mind was comparing yourself to somewhat, like, where were you even finding these ideals to compare yourself against?
So I think a big piece of it for me has actually been a result of modern day technology and social media. I think that I wasn't realizing, as Facebook and Instagram have become places where people are sharing a lot about their families' lives, at least people in our generation. I think younger people are using different things that I don't know about. But I would start, especially when we kind of started on this gentle parenting and homeschooling, unschooling path, I would start to discover other families who were living in some way that I aspired to be. So I found a lot of homeschooling Instagram accounts, for example, and I think that had become, for a while, a major pain point for me because I, in my gut, kind of knew what we wanted to be doing with our family, which was more of an unschooling approach. And I found all these homeschooling accounts thinking like, oh, I'm going to find some great ideas of stuff to do with the kids here. But what ended up happening, and it took me, I think, years to realize it, is I would see these posts, these photos, and read the captions of families doing all of these things that our family wasn't doing. So whether it was all of these like beautiful, expensive art materials laid out on the table and all the kids were engaging in art with like this beautiful sunlight streaming through the window, or it was people, a bunch of kids tromping out in the woods and the parents talking about how they literally spent all day out there. All of these things that they tended to be things that I like to do with my time. And things that I wasn't realizing that I was valuing higher or as better than other things. There's that comparison again.
Right.
Valuing hobbies and ways people like to spend their time in different ways, comparing those. And so I was seeing these things, and especially if it had been on like a day where it felt like we had not done much at all, they were just making me feel terrible. Like I was less than, or I wasn't providing a good enough environment for my kids, or we weren't doing enough variety of things, or why weren't we doing like the really cute activity with the wooden letters on the table and all of this stuff? And I didn't realize for a long time that that was a big pain point for me. And actually, as a result of it, I would catch myself like getting stressed out and trying to recreate these activities for my kids. But what I was forgetting to do was actually look at the child and the children in front of me and realize like, this has nothing to do with their interests. So like art is a good one. For example, my kids are just not super into drawing and painting and things like that. They've gone through phases and sometimes they still will do it, but it's just not their thing. So what I'm saying to them when I keep trying to push something like that is like, you need to be more like this. You need to like this thing. And what I'm forgetting to do is actually see who they are and offer them things to build on the things that they're really passionate about. And what I realized is I was doing this all as a result of basically getting stuck on social media, looking at what other families do. And that's also not to mention that I know I do it too. Quite often is what you're seeing on social media are people's best moments kind of crafted for the public, right? So you're not seeing the potential argument they had about sitting down and doing the letter activity. And not that every family does, but you're not seeing everything that happens before and after. And you're seeing like one little moment in time.
Yeah, that's been distilled by the people that are owning the whole process. And I think it's interesting too. Like I remember, and I think people operate on social media in different ways, but I remember we got these amazing family photos taken by our good friend Sabrina.
Oh, this is a good one.
Who does incredible work with outdoor family photography.
Based in New Jersey. She's great.
She really is fantastic. But Doug, who's my business partner, and her husband, he was, helping her with her database the other day, and he sent me a picture, and it was from that day. And these pictures are just gorgeous. And
yeah, this was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, there's a picture specifically of you're holding the baby, and the two boys are hanging on us, and we're all like, laughing and, just giggling. And it's a really, really sweet photo. And what nobody knows is that day was horrendous. That was
like one of the worst days our family ever had as a family.
Exactly. And there were these few moments among like 2 hours walking around this beautiful spot up here in New Hampshire that were actually any fun at all. And she managed to capture those on film. And she shares those photos. And I suspect there are people that have looked and been like, why doesn't our family go and have amazing days on the beach where we're all dressed perfectly and do these other things? And it's like, even just sharing that moment probably caused up some negative comparisons in the minds of other people. And like, it's just worth noting when you see people's lives on Facebook and my life on Facebook and on this podcast and so forth, that there are people who do interact with social media in two ways. Either they just share amazing things that are happening in their lives. That tends to be what I do. I don't tend to
too, because I also like to focus on those things for my own well-being.
Yeah. And if I'm cataloging, I kind of use social media this way too, especially with photos, to like kind of catalog times in our lives and fun things that I would like to recur up on memories on Facebook
my personal
in the future.
Instagram account is just that. It's so that we have photos for our kids that we've saved.
And then there's, on the other end of the bell curve, there are people who probably, from my perspective, are sharing more than I would on social media. So like a lot of negative moments in their lives, or
sharing
fights with partners and stuff like that. And it's like those people are doing so for various reasons. But I think that most people, when they're on Facebook, sure, they have some friends that have some stuff going on or whatever, but a lot of it is scrolling and just thinking, and, people have done studies because it's a chicken or the egg problem. Like, is social media causing depression or sadness in people by having them compare people constantly, or people who are unhappy going to social media more? Who knows, But yeah, that comparison thing is right there on Broadway. Front Street, Main Street.
All those places. Central Ave, if you will.
Central Ave, in our town. Just give away our location. That's okay.
But there's Central Aves everywhere.
That's true. But yeah, so anyways, I think you're spot on with that. And I think...
But I think I think it's crazy that I didn't realize that was where the pain was coming from for a really long time. Right. Like, it really took me a while to pinpoint exactly what was happening. And I don't know, should I talk now about changes I've made because of that, or should we wait?
We're going to say this.
We're going to wait.
Don't say that.
Spoiler, it's coming.
Don't say it, whatever you do.
Okay.
Okay. So other ways that the comparison thing can manifest itself, and some of these are, I think, less obvious. You had a really good one when we were creating show notes, talking about comparing our kids to ourselves as a child. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So when you think about kind of your body of knowledge about children and families and what they're like, besides your family that you have now, if you're a parent and you're listening to this, your other huge experience would be your family of origin, right? How you grew up and what your parents were like and what you were like as a kid and what the family culture was like in your family. So I think we all know that these patterns tend to repeat themselves when we're not intentional. And so I find myself sometimes falling into a comparison trap and thinking about what I was like as a kid and comparing my kids to what I was like as a kid and to what kind of the family, also not just myself and my kids, but my family's culture as a child and our family's culture now. So for me, the way that looks is I had really, really loving and caring parents. At the same time, I was a kid who just kind of was willing to go with the flow. And I don't know if I was willing to go with the flow because I was easygoing. I don't really think I'm that much of an easygoing person now. So I don't know if that was it, if it was just that I was naturally easygoing, or if it had just always been an expectation from the time I was a baby that the grown-ups were in charge and made the decisions. And as kids, we just kind of went along with it. And really, like, until I was a teenager, probably, there was never I don't remember there ever being any tension over that. Like, it didn't feel hard for me. I had a really generally happy childhood, but it was like, if the parents said, we're going to go do this, we would just go do this. And I would never really feel resentful about it. But I think it was just the way it always was. And so I think back on that, especially when our family is having disagreements about, like, the grown-ups want to go do this and the kids want to go do this, and how are we going to make this work? And our kids just have these opinions and they voice them often, and we intentionally have chosen to make sure that they can do that. And that sometimes feels really challenging for me because sometimes, and James, you actually said this in the group, sometimes I have the thought of, gosh, if we had just parented in a different way, all of these things would just be easier for us, right? Because we're often in a position where we have to have really long conversations and we have to find compromises and we have to really problem solve very creatively to get everybody's needs met. And that can be really time consuming and feel exhausting sometimes. And so sometimes I do have moments where I'm like, geez, if these kids would just go with the flow, this would be so much easier.
Well, that's where the comparison trap really kills you too, because the tendency is to see the good things you can have, but not think about the costs involved in getting them, right?
Yeah.
Because in one's mind, it would be easy to say, well, hey, I would like to unschool and have kids that didn't advocate for themselves when it was annoying for them to do so.
Yeah, that didn't have opinions, basically, or
Exactly.
didn't express them.
Or did only, and this is something I don't know if I've ever talked about it on the podcast, but it's something I've observed many people kind of share or feel, which is like, I was just talking to someone recently actually, who raised their kid in a really independent way. And then that kid didn't wind up sharing a lot of her values. And it's like, yeah, because you raised him to be a free thinker.
To have his own thoughts.
Great news. You raised him in such a way that now he's off on his own thinking about things and evaluating things for his own self. And
right. He's a critical thinker.
Yeah. Congratulations. Most parents can't make that kind of
you did it.
incredible claim. But yeah, it's like, I think I think I shared this when I was on the School Sucks podcast, actually, which is another really good podcast. It's on our resources page over at onefreefamily.com/resources. But that I think a lot of people, and especially intentional thinkers, you wind up forming these really strong opinions about various aspects of the world. And then when you think that you're going to raise these free and independent thinkers, a lot of people still, I hold on to this hope sometimes too, that I'm going to raise this free and independent thinker, and then they will very logically arrive at the same conclusions that I have. And that's the comparison thing again. I will compare their way of seeing the world to mine. And if they don't see it exactly how I see it, I can sometimes feel like that's a failure on my part somehow. Like, well, these ways of seeing the world are so obvious. Like, and if they don't see them the same way, I must have failed them in some capacity, or like maybe this darn freedom, this unusual thing that we did, stood in the way of it. And so I don't know. I think, it's just so funny how how unfair it is, how looking at someone, this individual and unique person, and imposing this stencil of somebody else on top of them.
That's a good way to put it.
And thinking, why isn't this person like these other people, whether that's me or their siblings or
why isn't
kids.
Our family like this other family?
Yeah. Well, here's why, because it involves totally unique sets of DNA and totally unique sets of life experiences going through the world. And when we're trying to evaluate how our parenting is going, arguably the worst way is to compare, or the least scientific way is to compare our family to other families, especially on one specific given metric. Because for all the families doing incredible art projects, we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes there. For all the families that are having their kids do art projects, we have no idea how those kids feel about art later in life. Some of them maybe resent all that artwork they did, Yeah,
but or maybe that's their kid's true passion. And
exactly.
They're just doing their thing.
And it was easy for them because their kid wound up loving hiking and art or whatever their things were. And so, you're never going to have enough data to evaluate like which of the variables are causing which outcomes in which families. And so comparing is not only just emotionally draining, but also just unscientific anyway. You're not like doing anything helpful.
You just don't know everything going on. I just think one of the greatest costs when you're thinking about the costs of the comparison thing is the risk that we take in totally stamping out who people are as these unique individuals. Like every person is just born with such potential to offer something really unique to the world, or to just be their own self. And I think a lot of parents say the words, I really want my kids to be uniquely them. Like that's my goal for my kids. Right. But then we get stuck in this comparison thing, and we totally miss who these little people actually are. And they begin to totally miss who they are, because they just start comparing themselves to other people. And I think we really risk kind of erasing that, or it gets really tamped down by all of the comparison. And I think that's a really big cost.
Yeah, for sure. I think it also just ignores the fact that people hit developmental milestones at different times too, right? Like you see this, and it's just in the way that it's unhelpful, and it serves to drive parents crazy. Like think about how many parents talk about and try to strategize around getting their kids to sleep through the night. Just a very basic thing, right? Oh, is she sleeping through the night yet? How's the sleeping thing going? Mm-hmm. Or the parent of the kid who's not sleeping through the night. Hey, when did your kid start sleeping through the night? It's like,
and then you hear that the kid already is, and you're like, oh, we're failing. This is terrible.
Exactly. Back to the drawing board. Get to Amazon, babe. We need to look up more books on helping the kids.
I actually went to the library when this happened to us.
Great.
I had Ollie on the counter at the library.
That's good news, because that would have been a significant blow to our financial future if we
it didn't work.
invested in all those books at the time. But yeah, it's like, sure, sometimes things that other people are doing can be useful, but if we use them to think that we should have exactly what they have, it's never going to work. And so anyway, one other way that I see comparison causing strain in families is when people try to compare themselves to their partners. And this is like a slightly different angle on this, but you see all the time, like maybe one parent, I think you brought up the idea to me once of like the default parent, right? Like,
so there was an article about that was like
can you
circulating.
Explain what that concept is?
Yeah. A few years ago, there was this article that kind of made the rounds on social media, and it was about the idea of the default parent. And the idea was like, there's whoever wrote the article, there's typically one parent, if you're in a 2-parent family, who the kids just go to by default. And it was kind of like a tongue in cheek, like a joking thing about how, the 2 parents will both be home. And in this example, I think it was like dad was like in the room with the kid, and the kid needed something, and the kid was like kind of voiced what he needed, and the dad was like, oh, let me help you, I'll go get that. And the kid just walked right past the dad into the bathroom where the mom was taking a shower and like wanted the mom to do it. So it was like the idea of just like the parent that you just kind of default to when you need something. And
so that's kind of a cute and funny example, but I can say, I think having been on both sides of this, where like, you know, especially being a dad when your kids are very young, it's very natural for kids to prefer their moms.
Babies and toddlers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, quite often.
And so I will say that having been someone who's worked with kids for most of my adult life, that was painful for me at first.
Yeah.
And when I compared myself compared my relationship to the kids with your relationship to the kids, that was a source of pain for me early on, because I was like, man, kids love me. Like, what the heck? My own kids like sob hysterically when I hold them in my arm. This is not what I pictured. It's a combination of the expectations trap and the comparison trap, right? And it's like, it's not just the kid's disposition, because when he's with mom, he just sleeps happily and, you know, just snuggles right in there and he's at home, you know? And that comparison thing was really a big source of pain for me, until I was able to zoom out a little bit and have the perspective as time passed. Oh, okay. Well, they're not saying like, I love mom and I hate dad. It's just that there's, at this point in my life,
I'm connecting with this right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of people, I've seen this happen across like gender lines. Let's say that you have a son that's really into sports and a dad that's really into sports. And it can be either way. Say it's a mom that's really into sports and a daughter that's really into sports. And then the other parent isn't so much into sports.
Yeah.
Now, this will lead to a relationship dynamic where you have the daughter who's really into sports, and she's going to find the mom and say, hey, mom, listen to these sports things I did today, right? And since she knows that dad isn't super into sports, she's going to go seek the mom to talk about sports stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, the dad in that situation can sit there and think, oh, geez, I have such a bad relationship with this child. Like, she doesn't even want to talk to me about her sports stuff or whatever.
Right.
And again, it does two things there. First of all, it's awesome that your daughter has someone to talk to about sports.
Right. Yeah,
so
you miss that when you're comparing.
Big win, you know, like if your daughter has someone, you aren't into sports probably, and that's why she knows that. She doesn't want to talk to you about it. And so she's found someone in your partner that she loves to talk to about sports. And it also can just create more strain in the very relationship that you're worried is strained, you know? So you can look and say, you might say to your daughter, well, geez, we never do anything I want to do. Or like, why do you always want to talk about sports with mom? Like, I'm right here. Why can't we do something that's fun for me or whatever, right? But I think this can, obviously it's not doing great things in one's own mind to be focusing on these comparisons, but it serves to do the exact opposite of what you're hoping to do.
Of what you're worried about.
Yeah. Which is to strain the relationship even further, or to, even if it wasn't strained to begin with, create a strain where none needed to exist, because one was just feeling self-conscious, like just to say, oh, hey, my daughter's doing great. Like, she's not unhappy.
Right. She wasn't feeling any ill will towards dad. She was just like finding the person who she knew would be interested in the thing she wanted to do.
Right. Exactly. And I think, comparing yourself to your partner is, it doesn't lead to healthy feelings in either direction, because it can also lead to resentment towards the partner themselves.
Yeah, sure.
Why don't you not be so fun so you can go and the kid will want to hang out with me more or something? And that's just a rough dynamic all around.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So let's talk about moving past some of these comparisons. I mean, we've nodded to this a handful of times, but what are some concrete ways that we can kind of snap off these comparisons in our lives and try to focus more on the things that matter perhaps a little bit more?
Yeah. So I'm actually this is not in our notes, but I'm going to build on the example that you were just sharing about the sports go from our own life, which is obviously right now, our two older boys are, especially the oldest, are super into video games. And James has always been super into video games since he was a kid, and he still loves them. So clearly in our house, and I never have been, right? I've just never, as a kid, I never played them. So
we did play The Sims together for a little while while we were in college.
All right, moving on.
You were pretty into it. Go ahead.
Anyway, typically our kids definitely spend more one-on-one time with James right now. A lot of it playing these games because they all love to do it together. And if we're both around, they'll typically seek him out if they have some video game related thing to say or question to ask or a story to share. For quite a while, I think I was falling into that comparison thing. Like, man, they just like him better. Like, they never find me for these things. And I was just getting really grumpy, and it totally did drive a wedge into our relationship.
It was also just the reality that you had a nursing baby.
Right, because this is all happening when I'm also caring for a small child who wants me all the time.
Yeah, and they might not feel resentful, but they just like see that you're got your hands
they see, I'm up to stuff. So But now, it's moved to a place, and I think part of how I did this was to first recognize that was happening, right? Recognize that I was having these like feelings of not being good enough or being less than. And I did examine them. And what I actually did find, because I think it's I don't want to just get stuck in comparison, but I do want to look at like, well, is there something I could be doing to strengthen my relationship with my kids? Is there any value in this? So first I realized, okay, if I want to improve my connection with my kids, that's what I need to focus on. I need to stop evaluating my relationship with them as compared to James's relationship with them, because why would I want them to have the same exact relationship with both of us anyway? Like, there's so much beauty in the unique relationships that they have, and I love what they have with him, and it could never be the same because we're different people. So I was able to get to that point of like, well, let me just control what I can and think about my relationship with them. How can I deepen my connection? Oh, I can ask them questions about their games. I can play with them when I have a few minutes. And that's kind of where we're at now. And I'm doing it because I want to have a strong connection with them. And one way I think that we do that with our kids is to get curious about what they love spending their time doing. I'm not doing it because I'm aspiring to be James, right? To have the same relationship that he has with them. And I think that once I could make that distinction for myself, that really helped.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Nice job.
Thanks.
Pulling one out of your hat there like a
Pulled
magician.
it right out.
Yeah. So we've got some other cool ones too. I think one of the ones that resonates with me most is this idea of comparing your kids to others in terms of these like developmental milestones. And these can be academic milestones as well. You'll see homeschooling families in general, like I don't want to say obsessed about this, but it's like seems to be a big pain point for them, which is like worrying, are my kids keeping up academically?
Yeah, especially traditionally homeschooling families, like who are doing more of a school at home. I see a lot of questions in groups like, my kid is behind in reading or behind in math.
Right. But even if we zoom out, I mean, even if we can throw unschoolers into this.
Yeah, I think so.
When we zoom out and really think about the why behind education, even academic education, I think that we can get a lot more perspective here. What we know empirically, based on the data, is that kids will learn how to do different things at different times. Actually, the Khan Academy, which a lot of people use as a homeschooling resource, I remember very early on, they were noting this, that there were kids who wouldn't get a concept at first at the same exact moment then the fat part of the bell curve of the kids would understand something. But given enough time and self-directed energy put into something, that basically everyone was able to get through all of these beginner lessons, kind of observing that sure, something might not come intuitively for someone right away, but that given enough time and given space to not process it emotionally and to say like, why aren't I reading? I'm a bad reader. Why is math hard for me?
When we
I'm bad
take
at math.
the baggage away.
And that's the comparison trap in action there, because one of the terrible things about comparison is that it can tell you a story about yourself that isn't even true.
Right.
So sometimes it's like, if you say, well, I'm not keeping up at work because I'm not scanning the items as fast as the other cashiers. Okay. Yeah. So start figuring out how to scan faster. But in terms of academic development, many kids, their brains just simply aren't cognitively ready to multiply. They can't physically picture. Their brain does not have the neurological connections to say, what are 5 groups of 5? What does that even mean?
They're just not ready.
They're just not there yet. But what we also know is that basically everyone, for the things that people really are concerned about with academics, reading and math, basically everyone will be capable of those when given enough space to process. And if you have someone that's not going to be able to process, you'll know, because they won't only be struggling with reading.
Yeah, that's
they'll be
a different
struggling
situation.
socially, they'll be struggling with hygiene and all sorts of different things. And so I think, or they have like a serious learning disability.
You'll just know because it'll manifest in
Yeah.
other ways. And I think that what you said is so true. They're making judgments about themselves that aren't even true, because this idea of falling behind, what you're falling behind is what was arbitrarily decided by educators was a good time to learn your times tables or a good time to be reading. Like, these are all made up. They're all arbitrary.
Sure. And they might have even been educated guesses, but again, they totally ignore, even if that time frame is good for 90% of people, that's going to have 10% of people telling themselves a story that they're kind of stupid.
Right. Whereas they're just not ready yet.
Exactly. Yeah. And sorry for saying stupid. I know someone said in the group that I said that, and their 2-year-old daughter piped up, and 3-year-old daughter
said you should watch your language.
Yeah, I should watch my language. So I think I will.
It's not a nice word.
Let me swallow that one. Put $1 in my swearing jar there for a second. But yeah, so I think that the takeaway there is zoom out. If you're concerned about your kids' academic progress, the most helpful thing you can actually do in a case like that is to continue to support them and to love them.
Keep
and
feeding their interests.
Exactly. Because the way you can harm it most is by helping them to understand a story that they're not quite good enough yet.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to do that is to compare them to others.
And one of the best ways to totally squelch any chance of intrinsic motivation, I think, is to start telling them that they're not good at something or that they have to learn something now.
Yeah, because I'll also say that comparison is actually a pretty useless tool for actual motivation, because especially if you feel like someone's better than you at something, it generally feels like a helpless sort of situation where you're like, well, that guy's going to always be faster. Like he'll keep getting faster too, even if I do. Right? So we'll throw comparison out when we're hoping for healthy academic development from our kids. You had teased us before about ways that you've been engaging with social media a little bit differently. Yeah. What was that?
So once I kind of worked through and realized what was making me feel less than with the way that I was engaging with social media, this just worked for me. And this might not be what everybody would want to do, but I just actually went and unfollowed the accounts that basically I was noticing were making me feel bad every time. And it wasn't because I had any ill will towards the people in the families that owned those accounts. I hope that all of those people are happy and thriving. But I just realized James made a good point. Like I made sure to check in and say, do I feel challenged by these posts because it's a new idea that I'm trying to grapple with, right? Because like you might feel challenged by things that you actually really do want to be doing. And so maybe you should keep engaging with certain materials to help yourself learn more about something. But for me, I was feeling challenged by things that I had already thought long and hard about and really, really decided did not fit with our family's values. Not because they're bad things. They just didn't fit with what we wanted for our family. What's an example of that? Good question.
So like forced art time. You mentioned art before. Right?
Yeah. So I held this ideal that like maybe we would have all these like beautiful artsy things happening in our home. And I, not for lack of offering ideas and materials, like I had fully exposed my kids to all of those things. And they're still in our home. And sometimes people engage with them.
It's always lovely when our friends come over and play with
we have lots of friends who love my craft supplies. But when I finally realized that like this was not something my kids were passionate about, and it doesn't mean they may never be, right? But, seeing people who were posting pictures of that all the time, it just like was making me feel like not good. And so I think what I'm hearing
here is that you were okay being challenged by new ideas, right? But you were in touch with how it was making you feel. So for instance, unschooling was a new idea to us at one point, right? And new ideas are uncomfortable because we had different plans.
But here's the thing. When I would feel challenged by like an unschooling post that I would see, it was a very different feeling than feeling challenged by something that I knew was not going to be a fit for our family, but was maybe still appealing to like my previous expectations of what our homeschooling life might look like. The feeling of being challenged by like an unschooling post was like, yes, like this is where I'm trying to move towards with my family. It feels really uncomfortable, but that I know in my heart and brain, that's where we want to be. And that will be for my children what will make them happiest.
Yeah, so it wasn't causing you to feel worried or guilty. It was causing you to feel like inspired.
Exactly. So there was a big difference. So yeah, for me, I just went ahead and kind of curated a little bit more of what I was looking at so that comparison wasn't kind of pulling me out of the moment all the time.
Yeah, right on. And I think that this kind of leads us into potentially the last tip or thing that's been helpful for us. And that's been really going back and redefining our values, because you speak to this in the social media thing, which is to say, if we've made a value decision on our family, which is that, one of the paramount values for us is that people will be self-directed in pursuing their interests, right? And so looking at someone who's creating a bunch of art projects online, that's cool. And that resonates with those kids. If it does, resonates with those kids' self-directed interests, and that's awesome. But in our family, we're not going to evaluate ourselves based on are we making as many art projects. We're going to evaluate ourselves based on are people being given the space to pursue their interests. Because there's one thing to to say like, hey, everyone can do what they want. But if everyone knows underneath, mom's going to be in a bad mood if people don't do art projects, then do you really have the space to pursue what you want? Or do you know that there's a right answer to how you should be spending your time?
Right. And so looking at, when you look at all of the things you want for your family, there's going to be certain values that really come to the surface as what your core values are that you really want to prioritize. And I think once you do that, you start to see how other things that maybe feel appealing to you actually might undermine those values a lot. And then you can make the decision to let go of those things so that your values can really come through.
Yeah, it reminds me of an activity we did when we were at our first birthing class where they had us evaluate 30 things that we would like to be in control of for our birthing process when we were going to the hospital for that birth. And then once we had our 30, they were like, now pick 5. Because if you really focus on those, it'll help you get a sense of your priorities. And it'll make it a lot more likely that you'll achieve positive outcomes on the 5 things that are actually the most important to you, right? And I think parenting, especially anything involving where your kids are at home more often, kind of works the same way, right? Where you might in your mind be like, yeah, it would be really awesome if people do art projects. You probably still feel that way. And
right, just because mostly I would love to do it with them.
Well, of course,
that's what I love doing. Yeah.
Right, but if there's something higher up on the list that you would have to sacrifice in order to get art projects, then you could say, but
the cost would be so high.
I know that, open communication and, really honoring people's decisions, that's number 2 on our list or number 1 on our list.
Connection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, geez, I can see, if I'm honest with myself, that trying to get these things is standing in the way of that. And so, I think instead, and this is where, again, comparison is so useless, because if you compare your family's actions to another people's family's actions, you might be comparing your family against their family's values, So their family might have, their family arguably almost certainly has totally different value statements. Like a big part of a value statement in most people's families would look like, we're going to get a diverse set of educational experiences for our kids. Like they're going to be well-rounded, or they're going to, be exposed to all the world has to offer. And that's paramount for them. And actually, for a lot of people, being self-directed isn't even in the top 20. Right. And so obviously their lives are going to look different. And why, what's the sense in comparing how our kids are spending their time with kids that are in a family with a totally different values?
Yeah. So I would really encourage people to, sit down with your partner and even your family if your kids are old enough. And if you haven't actually created like a concrete value statement, it could be kind of a fun exercise, coming up with your family's core values. And you could even think about, writing them down and posting them up somewhere to kind of help you stay true to those. Yeah.
I love it.
Love it too.
All right. So I think that does it.
That does it. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey. And remember, every moment is a new chance to be the parent that you hope to be.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.